Good morning, everyone. We're happy to be with you this morning. It's funny, last week we came to you and it was raining here in Boise, which is so unusual, but this morning we woke up to a full out, what they called a significant event in the weather speak here in Boise. There was this crazy thunder. Mm-hmm. And actually it was out back behind our house because our house is about, would you say, 2 miles from the foothills?
At least, yeah.
2 miles from the foothills, and there was this crazy rolling thunder out behind our house that I couldn't even explain it. I've never experienced anything quite like it. And then it came over our house and kind of came out in front of our house. And I looked it up on the internet, and rolling thunder actually is like ground to ground lightning. And it's the way the sound waves, if there are mountains nearby, the sound waves actually bounce off the mountains and they roll off the mountain, and it makes this huge crazy noise. In fact, my first thought is the earthquake we had not so long ago, and is Yellowstone blowing, and that's why we're having this crazy thunder.
Wow. No, it was, I was nestled in my covers and very comfortable, but no, I couldn't miss that. It was cool. I missed the thunderstorms in Illinois where I grew up. We had lots of thunderstorms and crackling lightning, and it was always a spectacular event. We don't have that so much here in the high desert of Idaho, so I always enjoy hearing the thunder.
So the funny thing about, and then this huge storm came with wind and with crazy rain. The funny thing was, I went to bed last night thinking about lightning because I knew we were going to talk about being grounded this morning. Mm-hmm. And being grounded is kind of important during lightning, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. We don't have them out here in Idaho, but in Illinois where I grew up, we actually had lightning rods on our house, and that was the big deal. You take these rods and you stick these things up on top of your house, and then you actually connect them to the ground. And because the lightning is seeking the ground, and somehow it protects your house, it allows the lightning to hit the rod and go straight to the ground through the cables versus actually trying to go through your wooden house and catching it on fire.
Well, it's funny, when we bought this house, actually, it had been totally remodeled a few years earlier. And when we had the inspection, they said that the plugs in the kitchen were not properly grounded, and it would not pass inspection without properly grounded plugs. What would happen if you didn't have properly grounded plugs, by the way? I don't know.
You might get the shock of your life. It might just take you out.
Yeah, so we have some people joining us. Thank you so much, those of you who are joining us. We're talking this morning about, are you grounded? And you know, that term actually in the Christian circle, some people look at that as kind of new agey. Like, what are you talking about, grounded? And that's like, spiritual hocus pocus, and that is not conservative Christianity, thinking about being grounded. It's interesting because every night I have a grounding pillow that's plugged into the little grounding hole on the plug next to our bed. And every night I lay on that pillow for about 10 minutes, and that connects me to the ground. And so I'm a huge believer in grounding, but it's biblical, right?
Well, I think you're talking about people that consider a new age. You're talking about the physical act of grounding. I think being grounded in the scriptures, that's a very old concept that's not considered as new agey, but the idea of actually physically grounding, or the practice of grounding as a health practice, I think is what you're talking about.
I think it's people who think yoga is wrong and all of that kind of thing, that they think somehow even using that term is offensive to some people. But hi Julie. I see a lot of people joining us. Thank you. Good morning, Nicoletta, Rose, Sarah, Louise, Julie. Anyways, thanks you guys for joining us. Actually, it goes back, the idea of being grounded goes back to Genesis, in the very first chapters of Genesis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, Adam, Hebrew is Adam, actually means ground or dirt, or from the dirt. So obviously, the origin of humanity is very closely tied to the ground.
Yeah, and the word ground actually would be Adamah. Am I saying that correctly? Adamah. And so there's this beautiful play on words in the book of Genesis between God actually putting his hands into the ground. I don't know how else you make something out of ground. You got to get your hands dirty. So God, in fact, I read this book called Demon by Tosca Lee, and it's really a book, I've read it maybe 5 times, but she talks about the demons being so crazy offended that God made people out of dirt. And the demons would call them the dirt people. You know, God's dirt people. He loves those dirt people. And but we're people of the Adamah. We're people of the dirt.
Yeah, I think city folks may have a harder time with this concept than us who grew up in the country, who grew up in the farmland. Because in the farmland, we respect the dirt. Yeah. We cherish the dirt. And so even though people may joke about being a dirt farmer in kind of a whimsical way, I think deep in the heart, we cherish the dirt. We understand the value and the importance of the dirt, and it doesn't bother us to get dirty so much. Getting dirty is almost like a badge of honor to a farmer versus someone that's maybe lived in an urban environment may not understand that.
Yeah, I think as human beings, we long for the dirt. Now I'm not a dirt person. In fact, I've been known to go in restrooms in rest stops and wash my feet in the sink. That's a bad admission, and then wash the sink afterwards because I can't stand dirt on my feet. I can't stand dirt on my hands. But I think there's a way we long for the ground. We long to be grounded. And I've read studies that say if you take a colicky baby out and put the baby on the ground, many babies will calm on the ground. The ground, I mean, we know the ground comes up through our feet and centers us, and it gives us a place to stand. And I've got to think it's super significant that even Adam was named after the ground that he was made from. And then what was his first job?
Tend the soil.
Tend the soil. So Adam was a gardener, you know, and his joy and his heart was the ground, which tells me since he was created in the nature of God, that God loved the ground. I mean, maybe that was a big moment when God separated Adamah from the water.
Well, I think in the creation, we don't maybe appreciate the complexity of the ground. I don't think we maybe appreciate the ecosystem, all the different nutrients, all the different microbes. I mean, it's a very, we just think dirt is that something you want to sweep away, but no, the ground is very complex. The ground is very rich. The ground is very alive. It's rich with life, and it's amazing. Actually, when I was in pharmaceutical sales, they taught us how they find new drugs and how they find new compounds that can be turned into drugs. And basically what they do is they take a square foot of ground somewhere in the world. They go to various places in the world, take a square foot of ground and start separating the compounds out, trying to find new compounds that might be therapeutic. They might actually have a benefit to our bodies. And so that's really the root of most medicines, has been from the ground.
You know, when we went to Africa, we took a mission team to Africa, and one thing we were really excited about is taking all these boxes of shoes, and and truly the kids were excited about the shoes. But I remember talking to a brother there, and he was describing his childhood and how he didn't have shoes until, I don't know, his teen years. And I'm thinking, poor him, you know what I mean? Like, this is a sign of poverty. I was thinking, I guess, judgmental American first world thoughts, I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. I said something like that, and he's like, what? He's like, that was the best part of my growing up was running barefoot all the time. And then I remembered as a kid, my parents couldn't keep shoes on me. I ran barefoot everywhere. I was the barefoot kid. But he treasured that, and in fact, Africans form a lot of immunities from the ground. They have these crazy thorns, they're like, Robin, you don't have immunities to them, so you don't wear flip-flops around here, because if you step on something on the ground, it could be very bad. If you get a thorn in you, you don't have any immunity for this. But they develop all these immunities from being barefoot and having memories of parents pulling the thorns out of their feet. But it's an important part of establishing their immunity. So he's like, that was my treasure. And I was humbled. I'm like, I'm so sorry, obviously. Wow, I get it. I mean, I felt humbled that I had viewed the ground through just that immediately American thing. Man, you need shoes on the ground,
Right.
And
Well, I think there's a great movie, I think we saw it on Netflix, maybe on Hulu. I think it's called The Biggest Little Farm or The Best Little Farm.
oh yes.
It was something about a little farm. So sorry if we don't get the name exactly right.
It's a great movie.
But a lot of this story was about a couple who went and took some land that had been kind of stripped of its life. It had not been, they used a lot of chemicals in the soil, and about how they worked to restore the organic, the biosphere in the soil and make it where it would produce amazing organic fruits and vegetables. And it was an amazing story, but it took years to get that soil revived to have the full richness of microbes and various elements. And of course, I think in our era, we are seeing a lot more push towards organic, and we're starting to appreciate how important the ground is and how important coming from rich organic ground, how it makes the fruits and vegetables and everything taste better and be more nutritious for us.
Yeah. So, this idea of being grounded is something, when I do coaching with women, it's one of the first things I want to talk to disciples about is, do you have ground? Where do you stand? And a lot of times with women and in chaotic marriages where, they're recovering from sexual addiction or from affairs or something, terrible like that, I'll be like, make sure you don't cut off his feet. I'll tell the women this, don't cut off his feet. Give him a place to stand. We have this human need to feel grounded, but in that is this sense of having a place to stand.
Right. And I think it's really important that just as God told Moses, take your shoes off your feet, the ground you're standing is holy ground.
Yeah.
That's significant in so many ways, but I think we need some place to stand, but we also need some holy ground. We need some ground that is set aside for God's use. To be holy means to be set aside for God's purpose, and I think all of us in our lives need not only some ground, we need some holy ground that we can stand on, a place where we know that God is also present, standing with us on that same ground.
I was curious, and I looked up, I was just curious if anybody had tried to estimate how many miles Jesus walked. And of course people have, because I think first of all, the Bible is a story of the outdoors. Think about it. How many of the Bible stories, they don't take place indoors. Very largely, they don't take place indoors. It's a story of the ground in many ways, and it's a story of the outdoors, and it's a story of that spin out from the original story where the thorns came on the ground. And Jesus told parables of the ground because he was speaking to people of the ground. So it was estimated, if you look at Jesus' travels in the 3 years of his ministry, that he walked like 2,000 miles in 3 years. But if you look at his whole lifetime, it's estimated he walked 21,000 miles, I think it is, which would be walking all the way around the globe.
25,000 miles.
25,000 miles.
Would be all the way around the globe.
Yeah, all the way around the globe. And so Jesus was a man of the ground. He had dirty feet, because we know they all had dirty feet, right? He had the dust of the ground on his feet all the time. He spat on the mud, and he spat on the earth, and he made mud, and he healed a man's eyes, a blind man, with mud from the earth. he wrote on the earth when the adulterous woman, and distracted from the people. He used the dirt. He was a man who loved, he probably slept on the ground. And so Jesus was grounded in a way maybe we don't understand.
Well, I think that in his life, the population was mainly rural, and it was, agrarian. People had to farm. They didn't have the ability to go to the Winco or the Walmart to buy their food. They had to raise their food, and so he used a lot of parables around the ground. And in my experience growing up in the farmland, faith was easy for me because I got to see things planted, things sprouting, things growing, things bearing fruit. It wasn't hard for me to believe in God and I think farmers in general tend to be people that are more easily connected with their faith. They appreciate the work of God. I think if we've gotten away into more urban societies and people have lost that connection with the ground, I think it's made secularism much more appealing and much more popular because they've lost that connection with the ground. And I'm thankfully seeing people starting to garden again and starting to go back to the ground, because I think that's a faith connection. It comes easier when you're in touch with the ground.
So are you grounded? And thank you everyone who's joined us. We're talking about people of the Adamah, people of the ground. Are you grounded? And maybe some of you guys would like to share ways what grounds you in your faith, or ways that you feel grounded. What do you do to be grounded? Do you walk? What does the ground mean to you? And I'm writing a book on Sarah right now. So it's really interesting because Sarah and Abraham were city people, and they actually lived in considered a very developed city. It may be that they had running water, they had a sewer system. You know what I mean? We think of them somehow as that they didn't have any of that, but they lived actually in a city which was considered very advanced. And then God called them out into the wilderness to walk and to become desert people, and into the hills and the mountains of Hebron and all those areas, and as the ground moved under their feet, somehow that was part of God's calling to them, was let's go out of the city. I mean, there's probably a lot to that, but it's interesting, right?
Yeah. I'd be curious out there, how many of you, like me, enjoy being in the dirt? I mean, if I work in the yard, I don't wear gloves because I want to get my hands in the dirt, and how gardening and growing things is therapeutic to my soul. And I think there's a connection here, why that is, why people are drawn to planting and gardening and playing in the dirt, because it is somehow a connection to God.
Yeah, I'm allergic to dirt, so that's maybe part of my hang up with dirt. But I do love to go camping. Let's see, Donna says, I have to walk barefoot in the grass. If I'm feeling anxious or stressed, it's like my sensory coping skill. Just feeling connected to creation is an incredible thing, like skin to skin contact between a newborn and its mother. Wow, Donna, thank you for sharing. It's interesting, the word Adamah is considered the feminine form of Adam. And so, the whole idea of Mother Earth, or the idea of a womb, we'll talk more about that in a minute. Actually, you hit on something we wanted to talk about today. That whole idea of the earth being feminine. And in Eve's song, actually in my book, I don't know if there are any Eve song readers out there, but in Eve's song, the ground is very meaningful to Eve and Adam. And Adam is carrying the curse of the thorns. And so thorns play a role all through the book. But also Eve being swaddled in the ground, and swaddled like a newborn, feeling held by the ground. And really, it's a story of her learning to have a place to stand, because it felt like after what happened in the garden, she had no place to stand. And so it's really it's about her learning to stand against guilt, against her fear, to stand after terrible mourning, to stand in a chaotic marriage, to stand against the evil one, and then to stand, in a marriage being reborn is the story of Eve's song. And it started occurring to me how many analogies in here are grounded or have to do with the ground.
Yeah, I think some people may look at the curses of Genesis and Adam and Eve and think, hey, Eve got the short end of the stick, with great pain in childbirth and, those things and desiring the man. But I think the thorns could probably be equal or more, because that's something you could deal with day in, day out. And if you're a person of the ground, thorns are a huge issue. And so I think that was painful in many ways, to have the ground, cursed, because that was your ground is your friend, and now you're fighting, you're wrestling with it to somehow maintain yourself and going against an enemy, so to speak, because thorns are kind of your enemy. So I think there's something to that curse that's very significant.
And I think, in the book, Eve's song, it just made me think of it this morning. Actually, it's like a healing journey told in the voice of Eve, but it becomes every woman's story, every man's story. Adam and Eve become all of our story. But in there, it's the way I came to understand why Cain killed Abel. Was Cain was a boy and a young man of the ground, and Abel was a young man of the flocks. So imagine you are a young man of the ground, and that's your thing, and you see your father's anguish over the ground. You see the ground disappoint your father again and again and again. And then this whole thing of the offering, he brought an offering, from the ground, and Abel brought a lamb or, an animal. It probably wasn't what kind of offering he brought. I felt absolutely convinced of that. There was already a bitter root in his heart, and he's like, here, whatever. There was something about his offering, but the jealousy over that. But I see a primal wound starting with Adam's wound, with the ground, kind of passing on to Cain. This is my conjecture, but it makes a lot of sense. Well, Psalm 103, we can't talk about this without Psalm 103.
Right. I think we've got to then look and say, okay, we've kind of talked about how important, how powerful, how significant the ground is. So let's talk about how to find, or what is our ground as disciples of Jesus. Where can we find the ground spiritually that will allow us to flourish, allow us to be fruitful, allow us to feel solid in our faith? And I just thought Psalm 103 was so powerful. I mean, the whole psalm is very powerful, but picking up in verse 13, it says, the same way a loving father feels toward his children, that's but a sample of your tender feelings toward us. Your beloved children, who live in awe of you. You know all about us, inside and out. You're mindful that we are made from dust. I think, to me, what that's saying is the ground that I can stand on is that I am a beloved child of God.
Yeah.
That God is my Father, and He has a tender affection toward me. He has feeling towards me. I'm in awe of Him, but He wants me to know that He understands, that we are made from dust. And I think a lot of the incarnation of Christ coming to walk in the dust had to do with
made of dirt, made of dust.
Yeah, and it had a lot to do with God even wanting a greater relationship, a deeper, more empathy, more understanding, for His tenderness to even increase toward us, having now the mediator in Jesus to explain what it's like to be made of dust.
Well, imagine what the demons would say about that. God is pouring Himself. He's becoming a dirt person. And for those of you who are just joining, thank you for joining us. We're talking about our people of the Adamah, which is the ground in Genesis, and Adam being made from Adam in the Hebrew, being made from the dirt, being made from the ground. Are you grounded? And what does it mean to be grounded? And it's interesting because what Dave read was from the Passion Translation, which, we've been using in many of these, the Passion Translation. And there's a footnote that's amazing here where it says that the way a loving father feels towards his children, that's but a sample, just a little taste of your tender feelings towards us. That word tender feelings is raham, and it's a homonym, which can also be translated womb. So there you go. Was it Nicola? Who was it? What Donna talking about the womb? Is that he says our Father carries you in his womb. That, in other words, the tender feelings he has towards us are like a mother with a child in the womb. That raham. And it says, what a beautiful wordplay that our Father has a mother's nurturing love for his children. That's a place to stand, right? That I'm carried in God's very womb. You know, that's how intimate he feels with me. Like he feels my kicks, he feels my breath, he feels my struggle, he feels my fear, he feels everything I go through. My Father feels it because he's got that kind of, like a mother feels everything about that with her children.
I think this idea that God is mindful that we're made from dust, well, there's so many places you can go with that. Possibly, it's also a paradox here that dust can be seen as a negative thing, but also a positive thing. But maybe he's saying that God knows we're complex.
Oh yes, this is good.
God knows.
This is good.
God knows that we're complex, that we've got a lot of stuff going on. We've got a lot of microbes. We've got a lot of things happening in us that are competing with inside us as to whether we're going to be a positive or a negative, whether we're going to be bringing forth fruit or whether we're going to be contaminating something. I mean, there's that potential. Dirt has that potential, obviously, because of its microbial richness. If you're going into a surgery, you don't want to see dirty things around you. You want no dirt. You want zero dirt. You want a totally sterile environment. So dirt has the potential for good and for evil. And I think God knows that about us. We have the potential for richness, for fruitfulness, for wonderful organic life, relationships that are full of life. But we also have the potential to be a contaminant. We have the potential to sin. We have the potential to infect others and influence others in a negative way. And so I think possibly the scripture may mean that when God knows we're dust, he knows we're complex. He knows we have the potential for good and for evil, and it's going to be a wrestling. It's going to be a struggle all through our lives. And sometimes we're going to win, and sometimes we're going to lose.
Well, and maybe too, Dave, that, we use that word dirty, right? Like parents say to children, oh, you have a dirty mind. Don't have a dirty mind.
Wash your mouth out with soap.
Yeah, wash your dirty words. And dirt has been used as shame language for other people. And even, people who struggle with sexual sin, they can start to see themselves as contaminated or dirty or or gross, or, oh, I'm that dirty old man. I'm that dirty person. I've got, I'm unclean. I should be, other people, if they knew me, they would reject me. They would run away from me. They wouldn't love me. But God looks at us and he doesn't see us that way. Mm-hmm. He doesn't see dirt that way. Like you said, he sees, let me get my hands in that dirt. Let me use that dirt to teach you about yourself. Let me guide you to the roots. Let me bring new creation out of that. And we've seen that, right? With so many people that we've helped who felt like, I've had people come to me who said, you're the last hope.
Right.
Talking to you is the very last bit of hope. And because I don't think anyone else in this world I could tell this thing I did. And I'm like, the thing they need to know is there is hope, that we serve a God of recreation and that he knows that we're made of dust and he wants to work with us on it.
And some of the people who are the most fruitful and the most powerful are those who have been the most dirty.
Oh, there you go.
there's that.
There you go.
Not that you should go out and get dirty so you can be powerful. Don't do that. That's not,
yeah.
not what we're saying here at all. But think about that. Some of those who played in the mud, in the negative kind of mud, and been soiled once they've been cleansed by the blood of Christ, They sometimes have a richness about their testimony, have a certain authenticity about them. People are drawn to you not because of your cleanness. People are drawn to you because of your connection to the dirt, I think, and to your past, and to your, you think about even roots, how important roots are.
Yeah.
Where do roots live?
In the dirt.
They live in the dirt. And so somehow I think there's a way we need to be rooted and grounded and rooted. Those two are very similar topics that not only stand on the ground, but actually dig down in and connect and go deep into the ground, understand your humanity, but also understand your potential. And if you've been in the dirt, that doesn't mean you're disqualified, doesn't mean you're not usable. Actually, in some ways, maybe you're even more usable. The way Paul thought that in him, the worst of sinners, Christ might display his unlimited patience. And I think others seeing your humanity and seeing, people are drawn to your weakness, they're not drawn to your strength. So I think the more connected you are to your humanity, to your struggles, and the more open you are, I think the more people will be drawn to you, and the more useful you can be for God.
And if you're a kingdom kid and you haven't had, if you haven't had purity struggles, well, praise God for you. But you know the inside struggles can feel just as dirty. The pride, the anxiety, and I think I was kind of a good girl growing up, at least according to the other kids in the family. I didn't feel like such a good girl. But on the inside, I was a mess. And, I'd been abused as a kid, and I had a lot of insecurity and deep fear and struggle, and God's wanted to use that. I think before we leave Psalm 103, there's also another homonym in this scripture. When it says, you're mindful that we're made from dust, the word is yatsar, which is actually the word when God created Adam. It says that God yatsar Adam, and God bana Eve. There was a different word for Eve. But that word yatsar here can also be translated form or frame. In other words, God knows our frame. He knows our fragility. He knows that I got bit by a dog yesterday on a bike. Riding a bike, he was chasing after me, and finally he just jumped and bit me. He knows my bites. He knows things that happen to us, and but he says, but yatsar can also mean to be in distress or be frustrated. So this sentence could be translated, you know all about our frustrations and distress. Isn't that amazing? When it says you're mindful that we're made of dust, it could also be translated, you know all about our frustrations and distress. These words combined would mean that God hasn't forgotten that he formed us from dust, and will experience frustrations as human beings, coronavirus, unrest. God is sympathetic to our difficulties.
Wow, I think that's the beautiful part of Psalm 103. And read the whole thing. It's just a powerful, powerful statement of God's love and God's tenderness and God's empathy, God's compassion toward us as a Father, as our Creator, and of course, even now, even more, having Jesus walk in the dust. Even more so is he empathetic, even more so is he compassionate, even more so is he mindful of our being made from dust. And this was written even 1,000 years before Christ, but now in post Christ time on earth, these would be actually probably amplified, God's feelings.
It's interesting because I'm on the council for the Idaho Mutual Aid Council, and one of our platforms is fighting for the oppressed, and so Black Lives Matter has become part of the platform. So I listened to a whole seminar this week for white people on understanding ourselves and understanding racism. But one thing they said is that racism comes when we're cut off from our own breath, we're cut off from the spirit, but also if we don't give other people a place to stand. In other words, you can like someone, you can feel fond of someone, you can have no ill intentions for someone, but you can still unknowingly be refusing to give them a place to stand. And I don't know, it was a powerful webinar. I'll put it in the notes. I think you can still listen to it. It was so powerful to hear these people talk about ways they got cut off from the ground, cut off from themselves, cut off from spirit. And so they had us do breathing exercises where we centered ourselves into the ground to open us up to understand that we're all dust. We're all made of the same stuff, that we're all the same. And that if we can collectively breathe, it says that when people collectively breathe, their heartbeats start beating in unison. And so even this idea of Adamah is so healing for these times we're in, that if we can understand Adamah, we can understand each other better.
Right.
And the frustration and fear and all the oppression and trauma that people have suffered.
Yeah, like the more we understand this passage of God's creation, the more we see how alike we are, and how God sees us and cherishes each one of us, and how we are 99.999% the same, and how silly it is to think anything but that. But obviously Satan has worked hard to try to create division. But when I see this passage of God creating Adam, I see every man, I see every human, I see every race in that, and obviously every race did develop from that. So basically, in God's mind, we are one.
We are one. So how do we help each other have a place to stand? And I think something we could talk about with each other, like especially when you're feeling guilty. Thank you, those of you who are sharing, Holly, Nicoletta, the vulnerable sharing on here. Thank you so much, Rose. Thank you guys for being so vulnerable. And this is a place I hope you feel like you can be vulnerable, because I just carried a lot of shame around with me for so many years. And then finding this intimate relationship with a God who doesn't care that I'm messy, I'm complex, I'm dirty, I'm fearful, I carry a lot of stuff, it's hard for me. But he has this tenderness towards me that gives me a place to stand, and that place to stand has taught me dignity. It's taught me spiritual warfare. It's taught me to stand against Satan, because my Father gives me ground to stand on. I don't have to be so scared of Satan. You know what I mean? I have a place to engage spiritual warfare, not just for myself, but for other people.
Yeah. I think it also gives me the ability to laugh at myself. Not be too serious with myself. Realizing that I am dust, realizing that I am complex, realizing that there are
I would agree.
There are things that are constantly competing inside me, and it is it's life is great, but if I strive for perfection, if I strive to do everything right, it's in vain, because I'm going to make mistakes. I think obviously the scripture, Psalm 103, to me says God knows I'm going to make mistakes. I know it's not going to always go the way I think it's going to go. And so I can rejoice and laugh in that and not get overstressed.
Yeah, so, as we're wrapping up here, actually, this ties into hupomone, which we did several webinars on, which is the idea of cheerful endurance. But I looked up this morning and found out it also means being able to stand under suffering, to be able to stand in suffering, and a person who refuses to give up, who refuses to surrender. So I think let's look for ways to help each other stand, and let's give each other our feet, and let's work on being grounded and feeling the ground beneath our feet and understanding who we are to God.
Yeah, I think that's what you said earlier is so important. As we approach each other in difficult situations, always give the other person a place to stand. Yeah. And I like to do that by pointing out, I would say the disciple in them, pointing out what I know about them that I respect, what I know about them that is good, and that I'm for them not against them. If they have a place to stand and they know I respect them and they know I see the good in them, then they're much more able to receive any kind of correction, any kind of admonition, because they know I'm not trying to pull the rug out or pull the ground underneath them.
And what we've found is funny when we go to churches, because of our books and our expertise, churches often ask us to get with couples that are in a lot of chaos. And we've made some of the best friends in our life this way, by the way. But we found that if we can get people who are in chaos to laugh, and Dave is just hilarious, right? You figured this out, right? That Dave's hilarious. So he'll tell these crazy analogies. Like there was a famous one about a straitjacket that
Don't even go there.
Don't even go there. But anyways, you know, and we get laughing with these couples who are going through a lot of stuff, because we've been through a lot of stuff. We get laughing and laughing, and then our hearts open up, and we can talk about deep, vulnerable stuff. We can share, because we know that if we can laugh together, there must be hope. You know, if we can laugh together, there must be something good that can come, you know, as people of the Adamah. We still have people joining us. We're talking about, do you have a place to stand in this beautiful biblical concept that we're made of dirt, and it's beautiful dirt, and God puts his hands in it, and he forms us, and then he carries us like a mother in the womb. He loves us so much.
So as we conclude, we just pray that in these times of challenge, of strife, of sickness, of all these different things going on, find your place, find your ground, realize that God, find the loving, tender mercy of God. Take Psalm 103 and read it, if you have to, every day, to find that ground that God wants you to stand on, that perspective that God wants you to have about yourself, the way he sees you. Know how he sees you, know how he loves you. And start there, and it'll help you to not have to be so anxious or not be tossed around, because you'll be standing on solid ground.
And just to let you guys know, our website is finally working. purityrestored.com has a whole new life. On there you'll find, these are going to actually live there. They're starting to be uploaded there. You'll find our books. You'll find, and it's just starting, really. It's going to be growing.
It's going to get prettier as it goes.
It's going to get prettier.
But it's very functional now, and the bookstore is open. All our materials are there. There's going to be a ton of resources there. Speaking of resources, next Saturday will be Pure in Pandemic number 5, which is going to be on Spirit-led purity, which will be a very deep dive, a very powerful study. So keep in mind, at 3 o'clock Eastern time next Saturday will be our Pure in Pandemic number 5, Spirit-led purity.
And if you go to Purity Restored, let's say you want to read Eve's song, Story of the Ground. If you use the code at checkout, $5 off, we'll give you a $5 discount off of whatever it is you buy of our products. So $5 off if you want to pass on a book, or you want to get a book or a resource for yourself. Thank you for being with us today.
Yes.
We love these times with you. We love your comments. Thank you for all the good comments. Is there one today? No, there's no Pure in Pandemic today. That'll be a week from this Saturday is the next.
But they're all available for replay. The other 4 plus one we did for the singles are all available for replay. And if you need those links, most of them are. Just scroll back through my history on Facebook, or Robin's history on Facebook, or even on Disciples Today, and under news, you can scroll back down and you can find the links to almost all those. But if you have trouble, you can always send us an email at purityrestored, and at either pureandheart@comcast.net or purityrestored at gmail.com, and we'll help you out.
Wouldn't it be fun to have Adamah circles? And I think all of you are part of our Adamah circles. So thank you so much for being with us. If you just joined, we're going to post this on Facebook. Are you grounded? We are the people of Adamah. Love you guys.
Bye-bye.